Humanity had always been a voice too small for the great halls of the Galactic Council, a council where powerful empires ruled the stars and ancient species spoke with arrogance that came from thousands of years of dominance, and yet in those vast halls where worlds were measured in fleets and power was weighed in planets, the humans sent signals, warnings, desperate but clear, speaking of something approaching, something hidden beyond the edge of space. But when their messages arrived, the counselors laughed. They laughed in their crystal towers and golden chambers because in their eyes humanity was still young, still crawling, still too weak to matter. They called Earth a minor world, a small stone orbiting an average star, and they mocked the idea that such a primitive race could see danger before them. But still the warnings came, repeating, urgent, and every time the Galactic Council dismissed them, every time their voices of power declared that humans were exaggerating, that they were seeking attention, that they were nothing but a noise in the background of a galaxy too large to notice, and while the council chambers filled with laughter, while the elder species mocked the tiny voice of Earth, some of them did pause, a few, not many, but a few listened, their eyes narrowing, their minds uneasy, because hidden within those signals was not fear, but something else, something colder, a kind of certainty that did not match weakness. Yet those few were drowned by the council majority, drowned by arrogance and by the comfort of power that had never been tested, because for ages the council ruled without challenge, and no young species had ever risen with teeth sharp enough to bite. So why should this small blue planet be different? Why should humanity be any more than an echo lost in the void? And so the warnings were buried in reports, pushed aside, and forgotten in the endless tide of council business. But on Earth things were different, very different. Because while the council laughed, the humans worked, their leaders spoke little, their governments gave no speeches to the stars, but their factories did not sleep, hidden deep underground in vast chambers where machines roared day and night, where sparks lit the shadows, the humans built. They built with a purpose born not of fear but of determination, because the truth was simple. They had sent the warnings not to beg, but to test, to see if the council would listen, and when the council mocked them, humanity understood the lesson. They were alone, they would stand alone, and they would prepare for that day when the laughter of the galaxy would turn into silence, and in their preparation there was no panic, only patience, no chaos, only discipline. For this was not the first time humanity had been ignored, not the first time their voice had been lost among giants. History had taught them well. Every empire that underestimated them on Earth had fallen in time, and the galaxy would be no different. But still in the council chambers the arrogance remained. Some joked that humans were trying to sound important. Others said they were like children waving sticks and pretending they were swords, and in their pride they never saw the steel taking shape in human hands, never imagined the kind of weapon a desperate but brilliant race could create when pushed against the edge. Because humans did not ask for permission, they did not wait for help, they built railguns, weapons of unimaginable force, weapons that could hurl metal with such speed that no shield could resist, no armor could survive. But the council did not know, they did not even care to look. Their eyes turned away, their ears closed, and so the days passed, weeks, months, signals fading into silence, until at last one decision was made, one that would change the fate of the galaxy, for the council, in their pride, decided to send a fleet, not to listen, not to investigate, but to punish, to remind the humans of their place, to show them that the stars belonged to the elder races, and the humans were nothing but dust. And when that fleet was launched, when its engines lit the void and its commanders laughed at the weakness of Earth, humanity said nothing, no cries, no anger, only silence, because they were ready, and the council did not know, they could not know, that the warnings they ignored were never cries for help, but the quiet whisper of a storm about to begin. And in that silence, in that waiting, the galaxy had already changed, only no one realized it yet. No one except the humans who had stopped pleading and started preparing. For the day would come soon, when the council would understand, but by then it would be too late, far too late. On Earth silence covered the skies, but deep below the ground machines never slept, for humanity had decided long ago that words were not enough, and when the Galactic Council turned away from their warnings the choice became clear. There would be no allies, no helping hand, no shield from the stars. They would have to become their own defense, and so the greatest secret project in human history began. It did not start with speeches or banners, it began with blueprints, lines drawn by tired hands in hidden rooms. Engineers, scientists and soldiers came together not because they were ordered, but because they knew survival demanded it, and as the world above went on with its noise of life and ordinary days, the hidden cities of steel worked without pause. Night and day metal screamed as it was forged, and sparks rained down like falling stars in caverns so vast that mountains themselves trembled. The humans they built in silence and with purpose, no fanfare, no grand shows, only determination. Their leaders kept the secret close. They did not speak of the weapons to the people, or to the stars, for this was not a weapon of pride, it was a weapon of necessity, and in that necessity humanity found a unity that no council had ever known, because every hand that worked, every mind that calculated, every back that bent knew the same truth. One day the sky would burn with ships not of earth, and on that day the world would need more than courage. It would need firepower, unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They called them railguns, though the name was too small for what they were, each one a giant stretching across hidden valleys or buried beneath layers of stone, barrels longer than towers, wider than rivers, machines built not for show but for war, and in their design was a simplicity so dangerous that even the oldest species of the galaxy had overlooked it. While the council invested in shields, in energy fields, in weapons of light, humanity turned to raw force, pure speed, the crushing weight of physics made into a weapon. They built guns that fired slugs of metal at such speed that no shield could bend, no armor could stand. The weapons were ugly, brutal, and perfect because they worked always. They worked while others dreamed of elegance. Humans dreamed of survival, and survival demanded power greater than pride. While the engineers worked, the strategists planned. They did not think of glorious battles or shining victories. They thought of timing, of coordination, of silence. The railguns were hidden so deep that even the best scanners of the galaxy could not see them, disguised as mountains, hidden as oceans, masked by the natural world itself. Humanity turned Earth into a fortress, and still they said nothing to the stars, not one word, not one threat, because they knew the council was listening, and they wanted the council to laugh. They wanted them blind and deaf, so that when the moment came the shock would break them before the first shot was fired. The soldiers who guarded the project said little too. Their training was harder than any before because they were not training to win battles in faraway systems. They were training to hold Earth, to keep it alive against fleets of thousands, and in their silence there was strength. They knew the truth. The council thought humans begged for help, but they were not begging, they were building, and soon the galaxy would see what that meant. And still ordinary people lived their lives on the surface. Children played, markets thrived, streets filled with voices, while beneath their feet a war machine was born piece by piece, until the day came when the first railgun was tested deep in the deserts, hidden far from all eyes. The ground shook with a roar that shattered stone, and the slug tore across the air faster than thought itself. Mountains crumbled in its path, and the observers watched in silence, knowing that with this weapon they had rewritten the rules of war, and that was only the first, for more were waiting, more being built in every secret corner, until Earth itself was no longer just a planet, but an arsenal, a fortress of unimaginable strength. And the council still laughed. Their fleets patrolled the stars, their empires feasted on power, and they mocked the tiny voices of Earth. But the humans did not care. They did not need the council to believe, because belief was not their goal, survival was. And as they worked, they thought of history, of every empire that had tried to break them, of every enemy that had underestimated them and lost, and they understood a pattern. The galaxy would follow the same path. They would come, they would attack, and they would fall, and when they fell the galaxy would learn that humanity had never been weak, only underestimated, and that underestimation would become the sharpest blade of all. And so in silence the project continued. In shadows the weapons grew, and Earth prepared for the day when laughter would turn to screams and the first fleet would learn the cost of arrogance. The day finally came when the Galactic Council decided to act. For months they had ignored the human warnings, for months they had dismissed the strange signals from Earth, and for months they had mocked the idea that a young species could ever pose a threat. But arrogance has a way of growing, and soon laughter turned into prideful anger, because humanity had dared to speak too boldly, and so the Council gathered not to listen but to punish. Their decision was simple. They would send a fleet, a grand show of force, to remind the humans that the galaxy belonged to the old empires and not to a planet barely learning to reach the stars. The council chamber glowed with voices of arrogance, each elder species eager to prove their power. One after another they spoke of the weakness of humans, calling them a small flame that needed to be extinguished before it spread. But there were still a few who whispered their unease. They said the humans spoke with certainty, not fear. They warned that arrogance could blind even the strongest, but their words were drowned in laughter. And so the order was given. The first fleet would move. It was a fleet built to intimidate not just humanity, but any who watched its shining hulls stretched across the void, engines burning with power, ships armed with the finest weapons of the council, shields that had never been broken in thousands of years of war. And at its head was a commander known for his pride and cruelty. He looked upon the mission as nothing more than a hunt. One planet, one weak species, no challenge at all. The council praised him, they promised him glory, and he accepted with a smile, believing that when he returned, Earth would be ashes and his name would be carved into the halls of history. The journey was long, but in the silence of space the fleet was confident. They laughed at the thought of humans resisting. Some said the humans would kneel at the sight of their ships, others joked that Earth might surrender before the first shot was fired, but none of them understood what waited for them beyond the blue planet. The humans remained silent, they sent no more warnings, no cries of fear, only silence, and that silence unsettled a few younger officers in the fleet, but their voices were ignored. The commander dismissed them, saying humanity had already accepted its fate, and he looked forward to crushing them with one swift strike. As the fleet entered the Sol system, the stars glittered cold and uncaring. Their sensors swept across the void searching for fleets or weapons, but found none, only silence again. Earth appeared below, blue and green, shining with life, but defenseless. No warships, no stations, no armies in orbit, nothing that looked like a threat to a fleet of such size. The commander laughed, openly mocking the humans. He declared that this mission would be over quickly, that the council would see his triumph within days, and the soldiers aboard the ships cheered, proud and blind to the danger below. But the scanners were not entirely blind. They picked up strange patterns on the surface, odd shapes of metal, hidden within mountains, buried in deserts, resting along the oceans. The officers reported them, but the commander waved it off, saying they were primitive structures, defenses that meant nothing against the shields of the First Fleet. He ordered the fleet into formation, preparing to descend toward Earth with all weapons charged. The humans, however, remained quiet. They showed no panic, no movement. In space they waited, and that waiting was the first sign that something was wrong, for in every war before, the weak always cried out before the end, but humanity did not cry, and in that silence was the promise of something the fleet could not see yet. And while the commander shouted his pride, the railguns waited deep below the ground, hidden from sight, waiting for the moment to speak, waiting for the moment to tear open the arrogance of the galaxy. The First Fleet thought they were hunters, but in truth, they were prey, and as they closed in on Earth, the balance of power in the galaxy was about to change forever. Earth looked quiet from above, too quiet, and the First Fleet believed this silence was proof of weakness. Their sensors swept the skies again and again, but found no human warships, no defense satellites, no space stations with heavy guns, only empty orbits, and the calm glow of a world that seemed to be at peace. The commander of the fleet grew bold with every passing moment, declaring to his officers that humans had already given up, that the strange signals they once sent were nothing more than empty noise meant to scare children. He ordered the fleet to descend closer toward the blue planet, so that the people of Earth would see the might of the council hanging over their heads. But what he did not see was the careful preparation beneath the surface of that world. While oceans sparkled under sunlight and mountains stood unmoving, vast machines rested in silence, hidden under stone, disguised as natural ridges, and valleys camouflaged as part of the Earth itself, and all of them pointed toward the stars like patient hunters waiting for prey. The humans had built their fortress not in the skies where it could be seen, but in the ground where it could not be touched. Engineers had designed every barrel, every coil, every chamber with care, so that when the time came, the world itself would rise against any who tried to break it. And that time was close. The people above went about their lives calmly, for they had been told nothing. The farmers worked their fields. The children played in the streets. The workers built in the cities, and no one knew that deep below their feet monsters of steel waited in the dark. But the soldiers and the engineers who guarded them knew. They waited with quiet discipline. Their orders were simple: do not reveal anything until the first shot is needed. And so Earth remained a mask, a world that looked unarmed and powerless, but was in truth a fortress built for one purpose: to survive. The First Fleet, the commander of the alien armada, laughed at the stillness of Earth, mocking that humans were cowards who hid in silence. Some of his officers felt uneasy. They whispered about the strange structures. The scanners had noticed long barrels, half-buried shapes that did not match natural formations, but the commander silenced them with pride. He had fought many wars, and in every war the weak showed fear, humans showed none, and so he believed there was nothing to fear. Yet in his arrogance he missed the truth, for the silence of humanity was not weakness, it was patience, and in patience lay danger. The humans did not need to fire early, they did not need to show their weapons, they needed only to wait, and let the fleet come closer still, until every ship was in range. The railguns were not weapons built for distant war in far galaxies, they were weapons built for defense. They were guardians of Earth, designed to strike only when the enemy was close enough that escape would be impossible, and so the humans held their silence tighter than any shield. The fleet moved Closer Earth grew larger in their view, blue oceans, green lands, white clouds, all beautiful and all defenseless to their eyes. The commander prepared his speech he wanted to broadcast to the humans before their destruction, words of superiority, a message to remind them of their weakness. But before he could speak, the first warning arrived, not from Earth, but from within his fleet, as a young officer shouted that energy spikes were rising from the surface. Strange readings from several continents. Strange metal coils glowing like fire, and then silence again. The commander dismissed it, thinking it was just primitive power surges, but deep within the Earth the railguns were waking one by one, their coils filled with energy, their barrels aligned, their targeting systems locked onto the shining fleet above, and the operators waited, fingers still, hearts steady, because they knew one order would begin it: all the silence of Earth would end with thunder, and the galaxy would never laugh at humanity again. Above, the fleet moved like a wall of steel, proud and sure of victory. Below, the world held its breath, waiting for the first trigger to be pulled. The council had expected fear, they had expected surrender, but what they were about to receive was war unleashed from the surface of a world that they had never truly understood. And as the silence stretched longer and longer, every second became heavier, until it felt like the air itself was waiting for the sound that would change everything. The humans remained quiet, but their weapons were ready, and the first fleet floated above, unaware that the calm before them was not peace, it was the silent defense of a planet that had turned itself into a weapon. The silence ended with a sound that could not be heard in space but could be felt, like a storm breaking across the void. For deep beneath the mountains of Earth, a railgun fired its first shot, a slug of metal hurled with such force that it broke every rule the council believed unshakable. One moment, the first fleet hung in formation, proud and untouchable, and the next moment one of its great ships simply shattered, torn apart by a strike too fast for sensors, too powerful for shields. The crew never had a chance. The commander froze, staring at the impossible, as alarms filled his bridge. His pride cracked with the realization that humanity had not been silent out of fear, but out of calculation. The second shot followed a heartbeat later, then a third, each one tearing through the fleet with merciless precision. The proud shields of the council collapsed like glass before a hammer. Ships that had survived countless battles against pirates and rebels were destroyed in seconds by weapons no one had believed possible. Panic spread across the fleet as officers shouted for evasive maneuvers, as captains begged their systems to respond, but the railguns fired again and again, each slug ripping holes through hulls, splitting engines into fire. The commander tried to rally his forces, ordering them to retaliate, but every weapon they unleashed fell short, their beams scattered against the atmosphere, their missiles tracked too slow, nothing could reach the hidden guns below. The humans had built their fortress well, and it was working with deadly perfection. The commander felt a cold truth settle in his chest. The fleet was not fighting a primitive race, it was facing a predator that had been waiting in silence for this very moment on Earth. The operators did not cheer, they did not laugh, they simply reloaded and fired again, their faces calm, their eyes steady, because they knew this was not glory, this was survival. Each trigger pull was another chance to live, another proof that their patience had been worth it. The skies above Earth lit with fire as ship after ship fell, broken hulks crashing into the atmosphere, burning streaks that turned night into day. People on the surface watched in awe and terror as fragments of alien ships blazed across the heavens like falling stars, but the operators did not look up, they stayed focused. The fleet that had come to destroy them was dying, and they had to finish the task. The commander shouted to his fleet to scatter, to escape the trap, but it was too late. The railguns had locked onto every target, the slugs tore through ships as they tried to run, splitting engines, ripping command decks open to the void. His pride turned into desperation as he realized what had happened. The council had ignored the warnings they had sent him to crush humans, and instead he was watching his proud fleet collapse around him. One by one the mighty ships became wreckage, drifting uselessly above a planet that had looked defenseless. The commander tried to send a message to the council, his voice filled with rage and fear, but before the signal could be completed another railgun slug tore through his flagship, and in an instant the bridge was gone. The council had believed humanity was weak, they had believed Earth would fall with a whisper, but instead the first fleet had fallen in silence, broken not by fleets of equal power, but by weapons. They had laughed at weapons they had ignored. The humans fired until the void was clear, until only a handful of broken survivors limped away, engines sputtering, shields gone. Their pride destroyed. The battle had lasted minutes, only minutes, and yet in those minutes the galaxy had changed forever. Humanity had revealed its teeth, and the first fleet had learned what it meant to laugh at a species that had spent its silence preparing. And as the last railgun cooled, and the echoes of thunder faded, the operators sent no celebration to the stars, they only sent one signal, a single message meant for the council, simple and cold: you were warned. And in that moment, the galaxy began to understand what silence truly meant when it came from Earth. The first fleet was no longer a wall of strength, it was a storm of broken fire scattered across the void, and every moment more of its proud ships fell. The railguns fired in rhythm, steady and merciless, each slug crossing space faster than any mind could follow, and with each impact another alien vessel was torn apart. Shields that had stood for centuries were useless against the raw force of physics. Armor that had never cracked before split open like thin shells. The fleet had come with confidence, with pride and arrogance, but now it was only chaos. Officers shouted orders that could not be followed. Captains screamed for evasive maneuvers, but there was nowhere to run. Every angle, every escape route had already been calculated by human operators who fired with precision and patience. They had built these weapons for this very moment, and now their discipline showed no waste, no panic, only deadly efficiency. And as the railguns spoke, the fleet broke. The commander was gone, his flagship shattered. In silence, and without him, the surviving officers fought not with pride, but with desperation. Ships collided as they tried to scatter. Engines flared too hot, shields overloaded and failed, but the guns did not stop. They fired again and again until space was filled with wreckage. The humans had turned Earth into a fortress, and the fleet into prey. Every shot was a reminder of the warnings ignored, every explosion proof that arrogance had a cost below. On Earth, the people looked to the sky, watching burning trails slash across the heavens, fragments of alien warships falling like meteors. Children pointed in fear, adults whispered in awe, but deep beneath the ground the soldiers remained calm, their voices quiet as they reloaded and targeted again. They knew victory was close, but they also knew this was only the beginning. The first fleet was not the end, it was the opening move, and humanity had shown its answer. Above, the survivors tried to regroup, a cluster of ships pulling together, shields overlapping, weapons firing wildly toward the surface, but the railguns answered in unison, their slugs cutting through the combined formation, splitting it apart, as if it were nothing at all. Screams filled alien comms as one by one their vessels cracked open, venting fire and life into the endless dark. They had come to punish Earth, but it was Earth punishing them, breaking them piece by piece until their pride was dust. Panic replaced arrogance, fear replaced laughter, and soon the fleet that had entered the system with songs of victory was reduced to a handful of crippled wrecks fleeing into the void. The humans did not chase, they did not gloat, they let the survivors run limping and broken because the message was already sent. Humanity had spoken not with words, but with fire. The fleet was broken, the council's pride shattered, and in its place a silence hung heavy, a silence that told every survivor that the galaxy had changed. The operators watched their screens as the last of the enemy slipped beyond range. They held their fire discipline until the end, and when the final shot was no longer needed, the guns cooled and silence returned. But this was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of power. Earth stood untouched, Earth stood victorious, and above it the remains of the first fleet drifted, lifeless monuments to arrogance, shattered by a species the council had called weak. The fleet was broken, and with it the illusion that humanity was helpless. The galaxy would learn of this battle. Survivors would carry the story back to the council, and every empire, every elder race would hear that the humans who had been mocked, ignored, and underestimated had destroyed the pride of the council in minutes with weapons that no one had believed possible. The humans did not celebrate, they did not raise their voices to the stars, they stayed quiet, still patient, knowing that more fleets could come, knowing that the council would not forgive this humiliation, but also knowing that the first fleet had proven their strength, and that proof was now carved into the wreckage above their world. The fleet was broken, and in its ruins a new chapter for humanity began. The news of the first fleet's destruction spread across the stars faster than light, because the survivors who limped away from Earth carried not only broken ships but broken pride. Their transmissions were filled with panic, with fear, and with words that the Galactic Council could not believe. Railguns that fired faster than sensors could track, weapons of simple design but unstoppable force, weapons that had turned the most powerful fleet in the galaxy into wreckage in minutes. At first the council refused to accept the reports. Many declared the survivors were lying, that they were cowards who had run from battle. Others claimed the fleet had been struck by some natural disaster, or ambushed by another rival empire. But the truth could not be hidden for too long, because the wreckage of the first fleet was real, and the signals of the dead ships still drifted through space, undeniable evidence that something impossible had happened. The council chamber, which had once been filled with laughter, now shook with shouts, fear and anger echoing against walls that had never known such chaos. Some demanded immediate retaliation, calling for a second fleet to burn Earth until nothing remained. Others urged caution, their voices trembling as they reminded the council that the humans had warned them clearly, and had not lied. Some even whispered that perhaps the humans were stronger than they appeared, that perhaps the galaxy had misjudged them, but those whispers were quickly Drowned by the roar of prideful voices refusing to believe that a young species could defeat their might, panic clashed with arrogance in a storm of words and accusations, and no one could agree. The elder species who had mocked humanity now found themselves facing a truth that terrified them. The humans had technology that no one else possessed, technology that was not based on ancient traditions of energy shields and plasma weapons but on something simpler, something far more dangerous, and it worked. The panic grew when reports arrived from merchants and travelers who had passed near Earth. They told of skies burning with falling ships. They told of human silence, even after victory. No boasting, no threats, only silence. And that silence frightened the council more than any words, because it meant humanity was calm, it meant they were prepared, and it meant they were not afraid. Some suggested sending envoys to negotiate peace. Others argued that showing weakness would invite rebellion across the galaxy. If humanity could destroy the first fleet, then other young species might begin to dream of defiance, and the council could not allow that. The chamber turned into a battlefield of voices, each empire pushing its own agenda, but underneath it all was fear, raw and heavy, for the council had never faced an enemy like this before in all their long history. Every young race had either bowed to their rule or been crushed, but the humans were different. They had asked to be heard, they had been mocked, and then they had acted with cold precision, not rage, not chaos, only calculated power. And now the council was forced to see that their arrogance had cost them dearly. One elder race stood and demanded that humanity be wiped out before they grew stronger, but another shouted back, asking what if a second fleet fell, what if the humans were building more weapons, what if Earth was not just a world but a fortress too strong to take by force. The chamber fell into arguments again with no answer. Clear panic showed in their eyes as they realized the galaxy was watching. Every empire beyond the council would soon hear that the mighty had been humbled, and that humanity stood defiant alone against the stars. The survivors of the first fleet gave testimony, trembling voices describing the slugs that cut through ships faster than thought, describing how shields collapsed like paper, describing the silence of humans who fired without emotion. Until the battle was done, their words filled the chamber with unease, and for the first time the council felt small, the same way they had once made humanity feel. Still, pride would not let them admit it. Some demanded revenge, others demanded caution, but none could deny the truth. The balance of the galaxy had shifted, and humanity had forced it. The panic was not just fear of Earth, it was fear of change, fear that a young species had broken the order of power and shown that the old ways could be defeated. And so the council panicked, not knowing whether to strike again or to retreat. Their pride telling them to fight, their fear telling them to wait. And through it all one truth rang clear: the humans had warned them, and the humans had not lied. The first fleet had fallen, and the galaxy would never be the same. Across the galaxy voices clashed in the halls of the council, but on Earth there was only calm. The fires of the battle had faded, the wreckage of the first fleet drifted silent above the blue world, and the railguns rested cooling in their hidden chambers deep beneath the ground. The soldiers and operators who had fired them did not celebrate, they did not shout, they simply sat in silence, watching their screens, waiting for the next order, because humanity understood this was not the end, this was only the beginning. The galaxy would not forget what had happened, and the council would not forgive, but humanity had prepared for this moment, not only with weapons but with words, for while steel could destroy fleets, words could reshape the galaxy. And so the decision was made to send a message, not a plea, not a boast, but a truth that would echo through every corner of space. The signal rose from Earth, clear and steady, carried by satellites and relays across the stars, and soon it reached the council chambers. Every delegate, every elder race, every survivor of the first fleet heard it. The voice was calm, not loud, not trembling, but firm and cold like stone. It said, you were warned. It said, humanity spoke, and you did not listen. It said, the first fleet fell because of your pride, not because of our hatred. We asked you to hear us, and you laughed, and so the guns answered for us. This is not war, this is defense, this is survival. We do not seek to rule, we do not seek to conquer, but if you come again, if you send your fleets to burn our world, then know this: Earth will not fall, Earth will fight, and Earth will endure. The words were simple, but their weight was heavy, heavier than the guns themselves, because for the first time the council heard not fear in the human voice but certainty, and that certainty was more terrifying than fire. In the council chamber silence followed the message. Every delegate sat frozen, no one laughed now, no one mocked the young species who had once begged to be heard, for the humans had spoken again, but this time their words were backed by fire and wreckage and death. Some whispered that the message was a threat, others whispered that it was a warning, but deep inside every heart they knew it was a promise that if the council tested humanity again they would face the same fate as the first fleet. Some called for peace immediately, others demanded revenge, their fear and their pride clashing louder than ever, but the voice of humanity still lingered calm and Steady across the galaxy, other young species listened too, those who had once been ignored by the Council, those who had been mocked or crushed. They heard the message, and hope sparked in their hearts. If humans could defy the mighty Council, perhaps they too could stand, perhaps they too could dream of freedom. The Council knew this, and their panic deepened, for the human message was more dangerous than the railguns. It was the seed of rebellion. It was proof that the galaxy's order could be broken, and that proof could not be silenced. The humans, however, did not speak again. They did not send more threats or more words. They returned to their silence, letting the wreckage above their planet speak for them, letting their calm message echo through the stars. The Council argued, but every word they spoke carried the weight of fear, because they had seen what humanity could do. They had seen their weapons, and now they had heard their resolve, and both were unshakable. The human message was not long, not complex, it was simple, and that simplicity cut through pride and excuses like a blade. The galaxy had been warned twice, once ignored, and once proven. Now everyone knew what ignoring them meant, and though the Council raged, though some plotted revenge, though others begged for peace, all of them knew one truth: the humans were no longer a minor species, no longer a voice too small to hear. They had become something else, something new, something the galaxy had never faced before, and the message was there. Line drawn in the stars: you were warned, do not test us again. The message from Earth echoed through the stars, and even when the signal ended, the silence it left behind was louder than any words. The Galactic Council tried to meet again, but their arguments went in circles. Some shouted for a second fleet, others begged for peace, and still others remained frozen in disbelief, unable to accept that humanity had spoken with such strength. The first fleet was gone, destroyed in a way no one thought possible, and the wreckage that drifted above Earth was a reminder of their arrogance. But the humans had not chased the survivors, they had not attacked other worlds, they had not demanded tribute or surrender. Instead, they had returned to their silence. That silence was more frightening than war, because it left the Council blind, wondering what humanity would do next. Across the galaxy, whispers spread among the younger species, those who had long suffered under the arrogance of the older races. They whispered about Earth, they whispered about the humans who had stood alone against the first fleet, and one. They whispered about the message, and in those whispers hope grew fragile but strong, and the Council knew it. If the humans became a symbol of defiance, then the entire galaxy could fall into chaos. Rebellion could rise everywhere, and the Council's order could collapse. The elder races were desperate to hold their power. Some proposed striking Earth again with overwhelming numbers, sending not one fleet but 10 yet. Others warned that if one fleet could fall, then perhaps 10 could as well, and if 10 fleets fell, then the Council would be finished forever. Their power shattered, their fear was real, but their pride was greater, and pride is dangerous when mixed with panic. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity prepared in silence. They did not rest, they did not assume the battle was over. They rebuilt what little had been damaged, they refined their weapons, they trained their soldiers, they watched the skies with patient eyes, because they knew the Council was not finished. They knew more fleets would come, or worse, something greater than fleets would be sent. The humans had no illusions. They had survived the first storm, but greater storms would follow, and yet there was no fear in their voices, only determination. The railguns were ready, the factories worked day and night. The leaders spoke little, but their plans reached far into the future. Earth was becoming not just a planet, but a fortress, and the galaxy did not know it. In the Council chamber, alliances began to fracture. Races who had once stood united in arrogance now accused one another of weakness. Some argued that their technology was outdated, that their weapons were predictable, that they had grown too comfortable ruling the galaxy, and in that comfort they had been blind to the danger of humanity. The fractures widened, and even as they fought among themselves, Earth continued to watch. The humans did not rush, they did not boast, they simply waited, and in that waiting they showed more strength than any fleet could display. For patience is its own kind of power, and the galaxy was beginning to see it. Then came the rumors of human expansion, not of conquering fleets, but of exploration. Quiet ships leaving Earth, moving into the dark corners of space. Some said they were colonizing other worlds, some said they were building more weapons, some even claimed they had found allies among younger species who looked to Earth as a beacon. No one knew for sure, but the rumors alone were enough to terrify the Council, because they could not control them, they could not predict them, and they could not silence them. The humans had become an unknown force, and unknowns are dangerous for those who rely on order. The future was uncertain. No one could say what would happen next. Would the Council launch another war? Would the humans strike first? Would the younger species rise in rebellion? Would the galaxy itself change forever? The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. The first fleet had fallen, the Council had been humbled, and the humans had spoken. Their message was clear, their weapons were real, and their silence was heavy with meaning. The galaxy now stood at a crossroads, and every race, every empire, every world waited to see what humanity would do next. Some feared them, some admired them, some hated them, but all of them watched, and all of them listened, because humanity had proven that they could not be ignored. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, and in that breath a new era was waiting to be born, an era written not by the Council but by the unknown will of Earth and its people. The future was coming, and it was dark, uncertain, and full of fire, but one truth remained: humanity would endure, and the galaxy would never forget the day the first fleet fell.